Throughout history, individuals have fought for their liberation, such as movements like the gay liberation movement, the feminist movement, and the civil rights movement, ultimately obtaining a little more power than they had before. Where this all stems from is the master narrative, which Ronald Takaki defines as embedded in our mainstream culture. The master narrative is the inaccurate yet popular story that immigrants to the United States were all European and therefore all Americans are white. The problem with this is that all of the power has been marginalized to whites, to white males, and specifically white males that are heterosexual, leaving everyone else that doesn't exactly fit that, including women who are white, out from this master narrative and this American dream. While obviously it is the year 2012 and individuals have a lot more power than they used to, women can be executives, we have a black president, but that doesn't mean that we aren't still marginalized, and that doesn't mean that women, that doesn't mean that people that are gay, and that doesn't mean people that aren't white aren't still left out of the master narrative. I have 3 interviews with me, each of them focusing on different intersections of identities that they feel have defined them as outsiders from this master narrative. Each individual is a university student, and each of them is going to tell you about how they feel that because their identity isn't necessarily white, heterosexual, or male, that they've either experienced some challenges or maybe even been empowered along the way. First interview was with a young lady that gave me some insight on her experiences in a housing shelter with her mother while she was in high school, specifically a housing shelter for struggling women and their children. 2 very important components in this were, 1, her realization that while she was in this women's shelter, she met a lot of women who had either been there for a long time or had small children that had prevented them from leaving, but also, more importantly, she had realized that this was kind of a cycle, that whether you be in domestic abuse, a part of households that, are just financially struggling, or maybe you were just even born into poverty, she kind of realized that women were socially constructed to be restricted from really being able to get out of these situations, which she kind of called a cycle that she wanted to break. The second very important component was the idea that there really weren't men's shelters. Obviously, there are, however, they're not as frequent, and that was what was important, the idea that, again, because women were socially constructed as inferior to men and dependent on men, they were more likely to be in this struggle and maybe even, in a way, automatically a part of this. In all, she suggested through her interview that being a woman, she was maybe excluded from many parts of the master narrative, and especially the intersection between class and gender as very oppressive and restrictive.
My moment that shaped me, molded me into the person that I am now and want to become is when I was in high school, between my sophomore and senior year. Me and my mom was going through rough times with losing her jobs, losing multiple jobs, not being able to pay bills and rent and whatnot, and my mom was put into a housing program for single mothers. It was only for moms and only for women who were struggling with children. They were always saying they were all mothers, and we were put into this kind of apartment complex where those women lived with their children, and they would all have really young children. I was the oldest, so I could kind of handle the situation. I knew what was going on. I was aware of the situation we were in and how tough it was, but the younger kids had really no idea what was going on. But you could tell that they were struggling and their mothers were struggling, and I really hated to see them in that situation. And the fact that they had no support from anyone, the fathers weren't in the situation, they were either had left or they weren't there or whatever. So it was only women, and the fact that they were all struggling with multiple children. So after being in that situation and seeing the mothers and their kids, it kind of made me realize how almost easy it is for women and children to be in that situation, because women nowadays are still not treated as equal as men, so they kind of do have less opportunities as men. So the fact, and I mean, how often do you see men's shelters? You don't. I've never seen one. I came across one. You go to like any homeless shelter and all you see is like kids and their moms. And so it kind of made me realize like that when I was older, that's like not what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the one to be able to kind of like break that mold that those women were being put in, because a lot of the time the kid will follow the same pattern by, they are in the situation kind of like how I was in the situation. They will grow up and follow suit. They will be in the same situation that their mothers were in, struggling. And so it kind of made me think to myself, and kind of what shaped my identity, is that I didn't want to be that. I wanted to grow up and break that mold and not be in that situation, and or have my kids or anyone else go through this situation. So I knew I would do like all I could to not be in that situation. So that kind of helped shaped who I am.
I was born and raised in LA, where there was a lot of Hispanics, and I was always the only Asian. But it never really occurred to me that I was Asian. Race never occurred to me at all. I didn't even know what race was. And I guess I kind of grew up colorblind. Especially living in LA, where everybody's so different, I guess I learned to accept differences. And race didn't matter. People's skin color didn't matter. The ways their eyes are shaped didn't matter. And no one ever judged me for being Asian. What does it mean to be different? What does it mean to be Asian? Like, okay, because I don't act like all of you, that doesn't mean I'm not me. That doesn't mean I'm not Asian. It doesn't mean anything. Like, it just means I'm me. I think it's really weird that everyone puts a label on race. Like, people want to label me as Asian, but it's like, but even back at home in LA, where everyone was Hispanic and I was different, I was the only Asian, that was never the case in anything. No one was always like, oh, she's Asian, like, she's different. It was like, okay, like, so what?